So I'll call the meeting to order. And I'd like to start real quickly with the Pledge of Allegiance and roll call. We'll do the pledge first. Can you lead us? Absolutely.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which is one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Need a roll call, please?
Commissioner Reggie Bellamy,
Here.
Mayor Jane Castor, Councilman John Dingfelder, Councilmember Deborah Fig Sanders, Commissioner Renee Flowers, present, Secretary David Quinn,
Present.
Commissioner Jeff Holcomb,
Present.
Jim Holton,
Present.
Commissioner Pat Kemp, Commissioner Janet Long, present, Seth Manuel Jr.,
Present.
Secretary L.K. Nandam,
Nicole Mills here for LK Nandam.
Commissioner Kimberly Overman,
Present.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey, Mayor Ken Welch. So that does give us a quorum.
Thank you. And thank you for everybody showing up. A quorum is a very important part of our ability to do business, so I appreciate everybody attending. Do we have any public comments this morning?
We do not have public comment.
With no public comments, we'll move into action items. We have several of our board meeting minutes that we haven't been able to approve, but now that we have a quorum, I would like to have them considered for approval. I'm assuming we can do them individually or collectively as one.
I would move approval of all of them, Mr. Chair.
I have a motion for approval and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next action item is our meeting calendar, and our chair will recognize David Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. We included in your packets this morning an updated master calendar. There are 3 updates from the calendar that was in your packet a month ago, and it reflects some comments that you all provided at that time. Number 1, we included the meeting that everybody agreed to have this morning. The July meeting location was changed from Hernando County to Hillsborough County based on the thought that we should probably have all of our meetings within either Pinellas, Hillsborough, or Pasco counties, not Manatee or Hernando. So we did change that location. And then we updated the date in August, which was originally the 19th. Commissioner Holcomb identified a conflict with that date, so we moved it to the 26th instead. So what's in front of you is the updated calendar, which we would like the board to approve so we can publish that publicly.
I'll make a motion to approve the calendar, but I would also like to include in that motion that all members notify at least 48 hours ahead of time whether or not they're able to physically attend for quorum. So if we want to add that to the calendar notice, I'd like to make that recommendation so that we are good about making sure we know who can and can't be here. So I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
I have several seconds. So it must have been a very popular motion. Great motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And thank you, David, for putting that together for us.
Absolutely.
I continue to recognize you, David, with our CAC appointment.
Yes, the city of Tampa has appointed Brandy Miklas as the CAC representative. Brandy is the Infrastructure and Mobility Program Coordinator for the city. She has a tremendous amount of transportation experience. She previously worked for Jacobs Engineering and HNTB, would be a great addition to the CAC, and we are asking that the board affirm her appointment to our CAC.
So moved. Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, David. We've had the executive director compensation item on the agenda several times also for review and approval by the board. David, I don't know if you want to speak to anything in particular about what's been recommended, but it seems complete to me. And if there's no board input, we could have it considered in a motion, and a second for approval would be appropriate, unless you have comments on what's been provided for his compensation.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to say the Finance Committee did support
Yes,
recommendation.
that's true. And our Finance Committee did support and recommend it. We just didn't have a quorum to approve it at our last meeting.
Motion to approve.
I'll second that motion.
I have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Your compensation package is finally approved, David.
Thank you.
Did we put you in a check?
Continue working for us. Chair recognizes Brian Pizarro next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In February of 2020, TBARTA, we signed a master agreement with USF for research and technical assistance. It was a 2-year agreement. It allows TBARTA to call upon the Center for Urban Transportation research on an as-needed basis. We've used them in the past. For example, they wrote our Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. They did the evaluation of TD Tampa Bay for us. They've done good work. However, the agreement expired. We would like to renew that agreement. Work that we give Cutter will be done through a series of task work orders. Those task work orders would still be subject to our procurement guidelines. So, for example, if the task work order is greater than $50,000, we would still bring it before the board for your approval. If it's below $50,000, David would have the authority to sign that. So the requested action before you is simply to authorize the executive director to sign the master agreement with USF.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Commissioner Flowers, if you have anything else to add, I know that came before committee also.
No, we just had a presentation before the committee, and there were a few questions that was asked, and primarily anything over, did we have the opportunity to weigh in on that? So everything was sufficient. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I have a motion and a second. All in, Commissioner Long?
Yes, I would like to know if there was any discussion, Commissioner Flowers, on the fact that it seems a little odd to me that Cutter is the one that we go to, and it's also the same one that the legislature uses for their work. Isn't that a bit of a conflict? Was that even discussed at your meeting?
That did not come up as conflict. They're two different, I understand that the state may utilize them, but when we're asking them for specific services, it's based on the contractual communications between us and Cutter. It should not be a conflict of interest, especially if the bid is, they're requesting to bid on services and we're utilizing them specifically for that service.
But my bigger point here,
But there was no discussion, in answer to your question, there was no discussion about it being a conflict. I would defer to legal on that since I'm not an attorney, but I don't see a conflict.
well, my bigger point is we've used them for a very long time. And because we are still in the place today that we have been in for a long, long time, I just can't help but wonder if a fresh look at our region might give us some new and interesting ideas to think about. Since it seems to, I don't know, and I don't mean to put Secretary Gwynn on the spot, but at the same time, is there a benefit to having a group that's outside of Tampa Bay?
I think, before he answers, if you don't mind, at some point, if we wanted to open this up so that we could see what other resources are out there, whether or not they meet our needs, I don't see why that would be inappropriate, but.
Oh, my God. Stunned.
I don't see why that would be inappropriate, but when you look at just the strong, and this is just my opinion, when you look at the strong partnership between the University of South Florida, where they are located, the fact that they've expanded services when it comes to their research in this particular area. I think they were just awarded another $75 million from the state because of their research work in this area. It just says that they are kind of like the go-to individuals, but that doesn't mean that later down the line, we could look at crafting a document that would see if there will be any other people to bite on that, and that probably should come through the planning committee.
Before the chair recognizes Commissioner Overman, I would like legal's input as to whether they consider Cutter having any kind of conflict of interest. Because I see them as two different things. The board may want to explore other options, but I don't want it to be based on a conflict that doesn't exist or does exist. I'd like your thoughts on that.
At this point, I don't know the relationship between Cutter and the state, but I'm assuming that they're a vendor of the state, just like they're a vendor of TBARTA. And it's very common for government entities to have the same vendor. You know, I would, if there's a specific issue with regard to the scope of work, I would need to analyze that with regard to it. But just coming in, looking at the status of a vendor for the state versus a vendor for us, even receiving funding, that's not going to be.
Well, I wouldn't want a conflict of interest to be an issue for Cutter unless there is one. So if you don't mind just doing a little background on that, and the chair recognizes Commissioner Overman.
Thank you. And I hear your concern, but I would also offer as some assurances, Cutter is used in the Tampa Bay region for a lot of different things. And what I have enjoyed is their courage to say things that we oftentimes as leaders won't say. So I think maybe that there is some hesitancy of what we've been able to accomplish over the years has been, I think, more board-driven rather than Cutter-driven, because they've made some really great innovative recommendations over the years, to my experience, and yet it hasn't moved forward because of policy decisions by our leadership. The good news is they continue to have the courage to say things that we need to hear. And I have great confidence that they'll bring us the information that we need from a professional research position. And honestly, this is a really great deal. So I would highly encourage continuing that. But to the point, I think it would be wise to get the request to see if, in fact, the new contract they've gotten from the state would present a conflict of interest.
So, Mr. Chair,
Thank you,
if I may,
Commissioner Long.
rather than take the time of the board to keep on talking about this issue, how about, if it's all right with the rest of the board members, I give the attorney the specific information that I'm thinking about, and that way we won't take up time here during the meeting since we have so much to do today.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Is that all right
Sounds like
with you?
I'm sure the attorney will accept that
Is
information.
that all right? Absolutely. Thank you.
But I think we should still act on the agenda item unless conflicts. I don't see any reason why we can't continue our relationship with Cutter.
I move that we approve the master.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to continue our relationship with Cutter. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Carries. Please note the objection from Commissioner Long. Chair, continue to recognize. Next item.
Last April of 2021, the board authorized the executive director to sign a contract with SCJ Alliance to do the Pinellas aerial gondola study. That agreement is going to expire this April. SCJ, they've been doing great work. It's just that the amount of coordination with city staff has been more than anticipated. For example, we're coordinating a meeting with the Clearwater city manager to discuss the preferred location of the downtown station. So the work is moving along fine. It's just that we're running up with the possibility of the contract expiring. And so what we are requesting is a no-cost extension to the contract. The contract language does allow us to extend for 2 one-year terms. And what we're basically asking the board to do is to authorize the executive director to exercise that first 1-year option. We would be extending the contract out to April of 2023. SCJ believes that the study will be done well before then. They're anticipating wrapping this study up by the summer. However, I'm just going off of what's in the contract language, which is to add a 1-year extension to the contract.
To recognize Commissioner Flowers.
Thank you. Has the scope of this project changed? Because I heard that there potentially is no longer a desire for it to go into downtown St. Pete. If so, should we, I'm not sure if that's accurate, Mr. Mayor, but if that is, should we look at changing the scope that you have before us? If that is the case where it says it involves more coordination with the city of St. Petersburg.
In December, we briefed outgoing Mayor Kreisman, and in January, City of St. Pete staff briefed Mayor Welch. Based on the guide or the information that we heard from city staff, we're going to focus the remaining effort of the study on the city of Clearwater. I think, and I don't want to speak for you, but basically what we heard from city staff was they felt that it made more sense. If we're going to do a gondola project in the Tampa Bay area, the Clearwater corridor seems to make more sense. And so we're going to focus our remaining effort in the study on the Clearwater corridor. And we're going to kind of wrap up the St. Pete portion of the study with the SWOT analysis that was done.
Brian, even though that's where we put the focus on our 41-mile plan, starting with downtown St. Pete,
When you say
I mean, that route that we put the new Sunrunner line on, was that even considered as a, I don't know, I mean,
what I can tell you is that in the early part of the study, we did stakeholder engagement. We met with elected officials, civic leaders, say, for example, from the chambers, the downtown partnership, Car Free St. Pete. We did the same thing in Clearwater. What I can tell you is what we heard with the Clearwater corridor, there was genuine optimism about it. People, they could see that it makes sense. Even the people from St. Pete said, yeah, I could see it working in Clearwater. We consistently heard skepticism from the people in St. Petersburg that we met with on the stakeholder engagement, that they just did not see how this would make sense in downtown St. Petersburg. However, we kept doing our analysis. SCJ, they developed several draft alignments for downtown St. Petersburg. We presented it to the study advisory committee. Like I said, we briefed Mayor Kreisman. We also briefed Mayor Welch. But the feedback we're getting is there just doesn't seem to be support for it in downtown St. Pete.
Mayor,
Yep.
and not to, but does the data show that?
All of the routes that SCJ came up with are technically feasible. I mean, they could be built. It's just a question of priorities. If there's no, I mean, there's the technical aspect, but there's also the political and public support aspect. If there's no public or political support for it, it doesn't make sense to continue.
Sure would like to recognize Mayor Welch. We had a great voice, Mayor Kreisman, for your recent position and newly elected position as mayor of St. Pete. I'd like to get your feedback and input and an introduction to the board. I didn't see you slip behind me earlier, but congratulations on your recent win and leadership ability in St. Pete, big city and a big footprint for all of us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be here with so many great leaders, some that I know very well and some that I'm looking forward to getting to know. And nothing like jumping right in on a subject, right? That's what my
I didn't mean to start trolling.
my first 63 days or whatever has been, and we did have an early briefing. I just, having served on the commission in PSTA, the Clearwater loop makes all the sense in the world, parking on the land side and then getting folks over to the beaches. I think there just needs to be a lot more community input. And if you saw what happened with our complete streets on MLK, even a project of that scope, there was a lot of pushback because the neighborhoods weren't aware that they were losing a lane and some of the other changes that were coming. Was this a 4th Street alignment?
The third alignment that SCJ was recommending was going along Fifth Avenue. There was an east-west and then there was a north-south. Basically, the east-west alignment they were recommending would go along Fifth Avenue south, so south of the Trop, from the Warehouse Arts District over to First Street. And then you would have a north-south alignment that would take you up towards the pier.
It'll take you up where?
Towards the pier.
So it'll be going through downtown.
Yes.
And it just needs to be really carefully communicated. I think the visual impact will be a real issue in St. Pete. So that was my feedback, that we just needs to be a lot more communication about what it is. I know this is in the design phase, right? Conceptual.
Yeah, this is just the feasibility study.
Right. But once it gets out there, then we'll be answering the question. For example, you wouldn't believe the kind of pushback we're getting on BRT, which we planned for more than a decade for Sunrunner. And I'm still getting questions. Do you see what's happening on First Avenue? Well, yeah, we've been talking about that for a decade. And now folks weren't in the loop and didn't know about it. So that was my feedback. There needs to be a lot of communication, and Clearwater makes a lot more sense right now to me. I don't remember city council even discussing the aerial conduits at this point. So that was my.
Brian, your lead to this extension was related to that, right? More community input, more community meetings, more time to deal with the citizens in the area for the feasibility as well.
No, I mean, what our plan of action going forward is to wrap up what we have right now with the St. Pete. You know, we're kind of stopping the St. Pete part of the analysis, and we're simply going to focus on Clearwater going forward.
Do you believe St. Pete needs additional input? Mayor Well?
I do. I don't know. You know, we're all post-COVID, and everyone's been kind of isolated. I'm not sure what kind of community input we've had on this concept in St. Petersburg over the last year and a half.
Like I said, we've met with the chamber, the downtown partnership, and it's been consistently skeptical.
And I would say that,
Pushback was, why are you doing this?
and
Downtown St. Pete is walkable.
yeah, one of the concerns or comments that I made when we started talking about this early on is whatever we do in transportation, even though you're going down Fifth Avenue South, if you recall, I said it still doesn't embrace or bring in the greater part of South St. Petersburg, allowing them to be able to traverse into the downtown community. So Fifth Avenue South is good for the Warehouse Arts District, but you have really the heart of South St. Petersburg further south than just Fifth Avenue. So the only reason I brought it up was because of the language that was in the contract, and since it had St. Pete in there, and I had been hearing conversations about the skepticism with St. Pete, I wasn't sure if we wanted to remove the language. And if things occur further down the line, we could always certainly look into it. But if you think it would be best to leave it in there so that should minds be changed or a different direction or whatever, I'm okay with that. I just wasn't sure if we should leave that language in there.
It seems to me, just thinking out loud with you, Brian, that with a newly elected mayor gathering his own voices in St. Pete, that before the doors closed, we should visit with him and kind of go through that background process about what you've heard and let him at least weigh in on the subject as part of our overall debate. Unless the board feels otherwise.
That wouldn't have any bearing though on continuing to move forward with this contract.
No, I'm saying we should, but I don't think we should exclude the conversation that the mayor's asked to consider.
Right. I just wanted to make sure I was hearing what you were saying.
I remember where it started.
Well, but you know, and I understand that TBARTA has been working on this for a very long time. That still is very different from whether or not the community actually understands and knows what's happening. Not everybody in St. Petersburg communicates with the Chamber of the Downtown Partnership. So if you are not in that cluster, then there are some things you don't hear about. I do a newsletter so that stuff we're doing on the county level gets out. St. Pete now has a radio station that they do things. So it just has to be many different mechanisms that you use, because individuals who may not live immediately in that corridor or affiliate themselves with those organizations, they may not hear this. This is not, you know, on the menu for them today. Right now, it's housing. And so, yeah, it's housing. And so I'm not saying that the time we've spent on this, even before I got here, is not sufficient. It's not adequate, but it still doesn't necessarily communicate to others who would be buy-ins and partners if they only knew more about it. So I believe that's really what's being said.
That's a question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So when did this process start? I see April 21st in the agenda item. Is that the start date of the study, or was it prior to that?
It was
Or the conversation?
They began their work roughly around May.
Of 21. So just concurring with Commissioner Flowers, I had a lot of discussions and debates and neighborhood meetings last year in the campaign. Not one time was this mentioned in any of those meetings. So I just don't think the community awareness is there about this. So I think that needs to happen.
But it's fairly easy to build a no vote. It's harder to build a consensus. So we'd like you to have some time to weigh in on it. And,
I think Brian's question, I would recommend he's the first question we need to answer.
sure. Two. Commissioner Holcomb.
I am nowhere near an expert in St. Pete. Probably only been there a few times, commissioner from Hernando County. But I did have 25 years experience in the DC, Baltimore area, okay? And so in that experience, people want to get into mass transit. For number one reason is it's too painful to use vehicle transit. That's number one. So this predates me also. So I'll say that if this gondola project is to work for St. Pete, it either needs to be for the business community or from a commuting aspect. Maybe there's lack of parking to get to the places where folks do a lot of work, or it needs to be more of a tourist situation to get to the ballpark and the downtown and the tourist attraction. So if it's not checking those two boxes, and I would put them in that order of priority, then it doesn't sound like it's working for you. And like I said, from 1,000-foot level and really not knowing the details of this because it predates me, I kind of agree that St. Pete may not be the fit in more of a Clearwater, especially with the tourism thing, with access to places that don't have great parking. It's hard to access different parts of the beaches, the restaurants, the attractions in Clearwater. But again, if you need more time to look at it, by all means. But I would think, the business community, the folks that are commuting and working, and tourism in that order.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there yes, Brian?
With your people that we did meet with, I mean, outside of the chamber, we also met with the St. Pete Downtown Neighborhood Association. And I think I mentioned Car Free St. Pete, which are generally transit advocates. And in general, the feedback that we got was they asked us, what problem is this gondola meant to solve? They couldn't see it. Like with Clearwater, it's like they could see, like, okay, I get it. I see the problem that you're trying to address, the causeway. When it came to St. Pete, the consistent answer we got was, I don't see what the problem is that you're trying to solve here. It's a solution in search of a problem. Is kind of the pushback that we got, even from the Downtown Neighborhood Association. So,
Any other discussion?
Chair,
Yes.
I'd add to these comments as well, and I think when the genesis of this from a business point of view started coming up with some of the gondola vendors, their first choice, I think, was Clearwater, because the number of ridership there would be greater. There was tourists, and as Brian discussed, there would be, the mobility issue from the beaches, across the causeway. I think St. Pete was looked at as a secondary option for kind of a demonstration project, but a lot of the metrics in terms of actually getting people around really weren't there. It was more of kind of an amenity to get something started. So I think even from a business point of view, St. Pete was a secondary choice. And echoing the mayor's thoughts, I don't know that we've made the case from the community that we really need this as something to go forward with. I think it would work perfectly in Clearwater. And I think that was the original thought from a lot of the vendors out there. And now Clearwater seems to have that. I would suggest maybe focusing on that first and delaying decisions on St. Pete, pending more study from the mayor's office and everyone else.
So what's before us for consideration is continuing our relationship to complete study. Brian brought to our attention the potential of closing the door on any further input from St. Pete. I don't think we should take an action on that. It's more of an internal study discussion. And the mayor's asked for the opportunity to visit because he's campaigned in an area and hadn't heard it as a major topic to oppose or support. So I think all I'm wanting to do is move forward and not limit or take St. Pete out of any further discussion.
I move the contract as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Chair recognizes Kenneth Bowden, Commuter Van Pool Services.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Board. I bring forward an action item to approve the third amendment to the agreement for commuter van pool services with Enterprise Leasing Company of Florida. On June 22nd, 2018, the governing board approved the contract with Enterprise Leasing for the provision of van pool services. The agreement was structured with a 2-year base term beginning July 1st, 2018, and included options for renew for 3 one-year periods. The base term was to expire on June 30th, 2020. However, the board has since approved 2 amendments, the second of which renews the agreement until June 30th, 2022. Staff has now prepared the third amendment to renew the agreement for the final option year. So that would run from July 1st, 2022 until June 30th, 2023. Staff is fully satisfied with Enterprise's performance. We do not recommend any changes to the contract terms or conditions. And in terms of the fiscal impact, there is no change. The subsidy remains at $400 per month per vehicle. The projected expenses of which were approved for the fiscal year 2022 budget. We recommend approval of the third amendment for commuter van pool services with Enterprise Leasing Company of Florida.
Thank you. Are there any questions this morning on the van pool program or comments? Have a motion for approval. For a second. And a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Kenneth. Chair recognizes David Green on our office lease.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to update the board on where we are with the office lease. You may recall that we are currently in an office space in a building that FDOT owns in West Shore. They allowed us to use that space until things progress with the West Shore Interchange project, which they're beginning to plan for now. So we need to vacate that space this summer. And I've been working with a commercial real estate broker to identify a new office that we might be able to move into. We did find one, which is also located in West Shore. We received a draft lease from the landlord. I provided that to General Counsel, who's reviewed it and provided comments. I forwarded that back to the broker and the landlord for review, and I anticipate that we will probably have a conference call with them next week to talk through all of the concerns and comments. But I anticipate bringing a draft lease back to the board for consideration next month and hopefully approval.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that update. Any comments or questions for David?
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Long?
What's the amount of the lease?
The amount, it's roughly less than 2,000 square feet at an amount of $26.50 per square foot. So we budgeted about $5,000 per month for our lease, and this is coming in around $4,300 a month. And to give you some perspective, the lease that we had prior to the current one, the one over the Meridian, was almost twice as large in terms of square footage. The monthly amount we paid there was $8,483, so about $8,500 a month. This will be less than $5,000.
If you don't mind cheating a little bit, we can cut that in half in Brooksville for you.
I need
I agree.
Cause I'm getting the scooter today and I don't know to take me out.
Get your van pool.
Yeah, thank you.
You got a meeting trail already.
Thank you, Brightline.
Now we got to motivate
My name is You're looking for it.
Point out one other thing.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chair, we developed a board meeting attendance tracker based on some requests that we received last month. We did include that in your materials today, and we'll continue to see that in the board packet moving forward.
Commissioner Kim.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I know I wasn't here for the original approval of the minutes for last month, but I'm not included as being present nor absent, even though I'm stated in the minutes. It's happened to me more than once that I have not been noted as present on the minutes. So I just like to point that out. That's February 18th minutes.
It was definitely
Yeah, I'm in the minutes, but it's more than once
Came in
that that's
after the
occurred.
roll call, but she did, and she said, yes. Yes.
We had accepted the minutes previously into our records without modification. Do I have a motion and a second to
I move
modify?
approval of the minutes modifying that Commissioner Kemp was present, please.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. You're now present.
I think.
I just
Good.
wanted to point it out.
If I could just real quick, first, welcome to District 7. Glad to have you here. One thing I always want to point out, if you look, we don't have microphones on our tables. Those blue or those green things up there are recording, and this is going to be posted online. And I only like to point out that if you're sitting way in the back, or you're sitting on the side, or you're sitting it could very well show up. I just like to make sure everybody knows that they're very sensitive microphones. So I'm just saying that, just so you know that those things are very, I could be talking here really quiet and it could be showing up on there. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. That's
And
all.
I listened to my sound and I did hear the conversations.
Good.
Very good conversation about Secretary Flynn earlier. Thank you. It's nice. It's a nice system you have here, and I really like this. It's one of my favorites for our board meetings.
Are you?
I like it. I kind of like the
No, I like the airport. Commissioner Flowers?
Thank you. David, as far as moving, if we select this location moving over, how is it as it relates to accommodating any of our phone trunk systems? Will you have to get a new phone system, computer systems, any of that? Everything is just shift right over?
She's talking about the office.
So the next items are staff reports with no people by them. So you're going to be recognized for agenda item 6.
Yeah, the staff reports are just materials that we include for information purposes.
I know, but any comments, questions, pull anything out, flag anything for the board of interest?
Nothing in particular. We had some new committee vacancies on our CAC, some resignations. So we've been in touch with those organizations who are responsible for appointing people to make sure that they're aware, and we're working with them to identify new people to appoint to the CAC.
So from a policy discussion on our board meeting areas where we're going to meet in the future and move forward with the types of venues that we visited about in the last meeting with no quorum, can you update what we now have as opposed to a full board as to what our thoughts are, where we'd like to have our future meetings?
There was a request last month to inquire with TPA about having all of our board meetings at a central location at the airport. We did reach out to them, but they indicated they're unable to accommodate us. We will have our meeting at the airport next month, but they can't allow us to have any standing board meetings there. So based on that, we could certainly try to identify a central location, someplace to have a standing meeting, but absent that, we'll just continue to rotate around. Typically, in Pinellas, we'll meet at PSTA with the planning council as a fallback if PSTA needs their boardroom on that same day. In Hillsborough County, the county center has been gracious enough to allow us to have some meetings there. So same idea, we'll continue to work with them in the event that they have the room vacant for us. And if not, we'll try to find someplace else. Pasco County, we typically meet at the government center.
Thank you for that update. We were trying to move toward the airport, thinking that might be a great central location, but there's a lot of logistics involved for making our board meetings work. So, Commissioner Kemp?
One of my concerns about the airport that I mentioned at the time, it's not relevant now since that's not possible, was that we weren't able to broadcast live from there. I know this meeting now isn't going live, and I always think that's a problem. I'm a stickler about it, and I'm just wondering why it's not going live here, and I do appreciate all the great technology. Is there a reason? And I just want to point again that out as a really significant issue for me.
Thank you. David?
I would say whatever venue we're at, we work with the technical difficulties of those people. So at PSTA, obviously, we've been there a lot. They're set up to broadcast as the county is as well. I certainly defer. FDOT has been very gracious allowing us to use all this technical capability, but we have been
adding on to the TMA leadership meeting, which also I believe is not being live streamed as well too. So we've made that, I don't believe that meeting will be.
That doesn't say anything.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Matt Baldwin, TPO Director, and you asked us if we could broadcast this through GoToWebinar, and we're planning to do the TMA leadership group that way. And I believe that we're doing this meeting as well. Is it? Cheryl says yes.
So then we are doing this meeting.
Through our GoToWebinar. Yes.
Well, I think we're talking public, though, not internal.
Public access, if you have provided that link online, anyone can log into GoToWebinar and view it.
Now, we do publicize phone numbers. You can visually, sorry.
I think the request was that the board wanted to broadcast live on YouTube. And we don't have the physical capabilities to do that at FDOT. We worked with Matt and UIT. We don't have the capabilities to do that. So Beth graciously agreed to let us use the link for her meeting, and we are doing that via GoTo.
Appreciate that. So I guess the question is, what the public obviously understandably, YouTube, you can go on, log in, we send out the link. GoToWebinar, if you have a GoToWebinar account.
Any member of the public, click on the link for GoToWebinar and view the meeting. Yes. You don't have to have an account.
We certainly can require upon that. So, the request was we wanted to live stream the meeting as well. So we did put out there's a phone number which you can listen in, but certainly, obviously, the live stream is now, TBARTA does not have a GoToWebinar account, but certainly, if we're able to broadcast that or able to use some capability here, absolutely make sure that's available to the public. The public can link in that format we need to explore it. So absolutely. Thank you, Commissioner Flowers.
So FDOT could use Zoom as a vehicle. You can't tap into it because of what's the legal? Because I mean, the White House does Zooms. I'm just saying, the Congress people use Zoom, they use those.
We have platforms, but I believe Matt would be the person that would be able to speak.
I
From District 7 FDOT, the difference between various meeting platforms aren't so great. They all function in fairly similar fashion. So as long as the link is provided to the public, they would be able to view this live as it was happening. So regardless of the meeting platform type that's chosen, as long as we are able to use it in our environment here in our system, as long as it is set up to be able to be viewed by guest attendees, anybody can join that link. Now there is a maximum of 1,001 attendees in the way this meeting is organized. Some of that is depending on the licensing that the organization has chosen. So if you feel or there will be more attendees than that, that would just be something that needed to be explored in the licensing for the organization that set up this link.
Zoom is $45 for the professional one because I have it and I use it. You can set it up so that persons can either communicate back or they can't communicate back. They can only see and hear, but you can see who's there. It's several things that you can do with that platform. For as a former trainer, I use, if it was a meeting like this, I use GoToMeeting versus GoToWebinar. But that's your choice. But again, that's a platform. But it certainly can be utilized, and you can arrange it so that it's safe. You can send it out so that passcodes have to be entered to enter in or let people in if you're worried about, because some people are doing some bad stuff, putting all kind of characters over folks' heads and all that stuff. But yeah, there is a way to do it so that it is live, so that persons can interact. And I don't know if you all wanted to hear from the public, like the PSTA, they ask are there any people from the public. So you certainly can set that up so that if they raise their hand, you only let that one person in. You're not letting everybody in. So that's just some information for further consideration, Mr. Chairman.
Brian, I think what you're, Commissioner,
Just a little bit on that. I found this all the time in our commission meetings. We probably all have PIO people who are pushing out information, various things, important things we're doing. We just heard about St. Pete. A lot of people not knowing what's going on with the gondola there. The frustrating part is people gotta wanna attend or wanna click on something or wanna like the Fernando County Government Facebook page or the sheriff's Facebook page or emergency services and all those pages. So I don't know that necessarily live is the answer, but I think it'd be valuable to know whether it's live or recorded is how many people are participating and how many people are opening up the meeting and watching for our benefit and Mr. Green's benefit that we know, our folks being involved and maybe we can do things more proactively from public information standpoint to get that in front of people, in different ways to get more knowledge out there. So that's always the hard part, but, we're an information society, but it's hard for people to, absorb our information. Government, we're not that sexy.
I don't think there's something about the 1,000-person limit yet. Brian, board obviously would like to be connected. I think that's something y'all hear each time we visit Commissioner Kemp, and all of us, I think, feel the same way. So as our technology improves our ability to get out to the public in that space, I think that would be something we should explore, both DOT and other entities that can help us get there.
I'm sure in the future we can do it. We unfortunately didn't do it this time, but I'm sure we can get it for the next one.
Thank you. Very well.
So that's a perfect example. If I knew that discussion was coming up, I probably would have put that on social media with a link to a way for the public to access it. So we do have a TBARTA page. Do we anticipate posting the links there or utilizing Facebook Live meetings? What's our social media?
I would think on our page, but I'll defer.
I would say that we have generally we have a YouTube channel page, which all our meetings are streamed live except for this one. So we have the capability, we usually with Zoom, we'll certainly explore when we can. If go to webinar is not capable of going through the YouTube channel, certainly make sure we publicize that separately. We do have social media channels on LinkedIn. We do post information on our newsletter that goes out on a weekly basis as well too. We'll make sure that we're consistently putting out the links to upcoming meetings because I do believe our subscription base is a couple thousand people. And those are probably our most ardent followers as well too. So we are using those channels.
Thank you. Any others?
I can share that there are 6 live members of the public online currently. Actually now there are 8. So if anybody would like public comment at this time from them, that could be arranged.
Possible. We have earlier, and I think we probably should move through our agenda today, put it this in front of us as something we can explore for regular use, so that we know how it works from the chair's perspective. Is there any other business to come from the board today?
As it pertains to that, under the communications report, getting a summary of what our outreach looks like is obviously been prepared, and that's great. Having a consistent social media platform and notice to increase our attendance to more than 6, which would be the public. But the fact that it is on recording and getting that social media report on how well public is following what TBARTA is doing is always, I think, beneficial to the work that we're doing here. So if that could be, if it's not already in the report, because I didn't click on it right now, but if that could be included in that communications report, that might be very helpful for us to identify when our platforms do change, which ones work the best to have the public not only view it currently live as well as just watch it later if possible. So thank you very much.
Any other business for Commissioner Long?
Well, yes, I believe I was here when the meeting started today, and I haven't heard one word about what has happened with our appropriation in Tallahassee or what we're doing at the federal level with regard to the infrastructure funds. Since there are so many extraordinary opportunities with that, I think it'd be nice, are we not having a report on our state and federal issues today?
That was not on the agenda. The agenda was for the action items that have built up over the past 7 months.
Well, hello,
Does anyone know? I'd like to.
David Quinn, recognized. Yesterday, the budget was posted, and although I guess not official until 72 hours, and the governor can part item veto, but I did see two items from TBARTA in there. One was, I believe, 375,000 for operations. The other was $1 million, I believe, for transportation disadvantage. Yep. And the good news on it was it didn't have any state transportation trust funds. It was all general revenue, so that would not put us in a position that we may have to look at replacing other funds or finding other funds. So as long as it stays like that, no, that's just what I saw come through last night. But we're always hopeful that it doesn't hit our budget, because then we just have to find a way to cover that. Looks like it's coming out of general revenue.
I can follow. And do you have, Mr. Secretary, any input on the infrastructure package that went through the House 2 days ago and was supposed to come up in the Senate either today or yesterday or today?
State. So we're still watching everything up there. One of the issues is there's a lot of discretionary programs in there, but my understanding is at this point, there's not a lot of definition of how those programs will be administered, how they're going to be evaluated, and I believe they haven't necessarily hired all the staff yet at the federal level to administer those programs. So one thing we are hearing is that there's a very good chance that success on the federal discretionary programs will be probably higher if they're led by the locals as opposed to the state agencies. And so we're going to be partnering. We certainly will support and find ways to provide funds to match, but I think most of the discretionary grant applications will probably be best received if they're initiated at the local level.
Thank you for saying that. That leads a great segue into the rest of what I wanted to follow up. Pinellas County, I don't know about my colleagues on the Hillsborough and Pasco County, but Pinellas County recently had a workshop all focused on transportation and transportation funding. Because all of these packages that we now have an opportunity to apply for regionally, there's always a match that has to come from the locals. And so on top of that, we have our own infrastructure needs within our county. And as a result, we have directed our staff to come back with us for recommendations on a new funding source. Now, I do hope that you all heard along some of what she said in Commissioner Kemp, our last TMA meeting, and maybe this is a further conversation right after this meeting for TMA. Talk about out of all 67 counties in the state, there's only 2 that don't have a transportation piece in their general revenue.
No, I understand.
I'm sorry?
The ones that have transit, but what I understand, so the two that have ad valorem or.
Right. Not that we're advocating any kind of a referendum on increasing the ad or whatever, but conversation has to start because we have such a right, once in a lifetime really opportunity for a generation opportunity to act in a regional way to bring our public transit opportunities to the forefront. And in our county, we're hopeful that we can get our largest cities, Mayor Welch, thank you so much for being here to hear me say that. All partnering with us to work on a gigantic application for those federal dollars. Because, good grief, there's a lot to be done. And if you just think about the transition from the way in which we use our cars today and the price of gas, what it takes to have a really truly effective infrastructure package with superchargers in Pinellas County, there's only 2 in our entire county for almost 1 million people, and never do we go on the road, but I don't see more and more and more electric vehicles. So, yeah, it's a really
Chair's going to recognize Commissioner Starkey and then Commissioner Overton.
Good points, and I would say, in following up on the appropriations or the money that just came out, I am curious to know what, and what the counties may have received from the monies that came from the feds to the states that are not part, I believe, of your budget. I could be wrong on that. Pasco County received, well, we don't know if they'll survive the governor, but we received 14 or 15 million to continue Ridge Road from the Sun Coast working towards 41, which is a really important road in our county. You imagine we're still going to have 1 million people. We have 2 east-west roads. We need our third. We also County Line Road. We see some. I think did that one go through? So we have 15 million towards that road, and we signed that letter to that we will be going for a grant, no grant, or race grant. What's it called these days? Race grant to help get more funding for County Line Road with Orlando County. So what happened in Hillsborough? Did you receive any funds to do anything?
I have no knowledge of
We
it.
got sidewalk grants and another one, but here's to answer your question. I'd like to make a recommendation that at the next meeting, we have a presentation on the infrastructure plan. And since this group, along with the following meeting after this one, deals with our regional transportation issues, that where TBARTA's mission can be accomplished and understood when it comes to the opportunities of the infrastructure plan, that we have the sort of primer on how TBARTA could benefit from programs and plans within the infrastructure plan. And then it's my understanding by August, we'll have better instruction on how to apply for those dollars and what the staff will be set up at the federal level for those things. Yeah, it's a pretty big deal. It's a big plan. But I did meet with a gentleman from DOT at the federal level at NACO, and they did offer the ability for local, and did recommend that local entities apply for many of these because they are very specific forms. But I believe, to the point of addition to this organization, it would be beneficial for us to not only see what those but then see where those touch points with local efforts, as Secretary Glenn mentioned, where it fits, where local and federal dollars could in fact achieve some of the goals of TBARTA. And the reason I mention that is, Hillsborough County is moving forward. We had our transportation workshop yesterday with all of our partners to look at how we would go about generating those local fund matches that are necessary to compete for those grants. So I do think that because TBARTA has a regional mission to achieve, and the infrastructure is so important, it might be wise at the next meeting or in June, but I would prefer to have it in April, that we had on the agenda an opportunity to understand the various different metrics of the infrastructure plan that would coincide with TBARTA's mission. For new business.
I guess I was saving for the hearing discussion, but I don't know if we want to bring it up now, but we did get a $4.9 million federal grant, as most, I think everybody is watching grant to get our first ferry in Tampa Bay. And if we had worked really hard on that grant possibility, which was a little, it surprised me that when they put out these, specifically the ferry grants, you don't have notice that they're going to put it out. You have 5 weeks to apply for it. It was only possible, or at least we made, I think, a very competitive package because Hillsborough County put out $1.2 million. They has to be applied through HART, because you have to have a transit agency that can apply for it. It also is only available if you have a legacy system. So if we hadn't had a legacy system already operating, we would not have been eligible to even make application for that. And secondly, I think a big focus right now in terms of transit in Hillsborough County, by home, is our operation and maintenance center, which I think is in critically terrible condition for the past 5 years that I've been serving on HART. It was a renovated truck stop, this trucking company facility from the 50s. It has terrible plumbing problems, terrible mold problems, terrible leak problems, and they have we have the list, $100 million facility. I know District 7 has been helping us to make a match to that. We have an application into the FTA. It's our number one priority as far as transit goes. For us in Hillsborough County, and I know our TPO is as well, have looked at advanced applications as a commitment to come to the $1 million, because until we get that operation and maintenance center in the clear, there's nothing for us in Hillsborough County that is more important for moving people in transit than that operations and maintenance center.
Board members, unfortunately, the hands of time have caught us. The TMA meeting is going to start sharply at 9:30 a.m. So we're going to adjourn our meeting. Board, thank you all for being here and creating a forum so we can take our action.